What a lovely big room full of people. It's fabulous. And welcome to tonight's event. And this is our first joint event this year with Family History Connections. And we have Bronwyn here sitting in the front row from Family History Connections. So if you have any questions about what they do and the services they provide, do have a chat with Bronwyn this evening. So just put your hand up so everyone can see it. There we go. Make sure you talk to Bronwyn. My name's Judith and I'm President of the Library and Chair of the Library Board. And I'd also like to convey a very warm welcome to our guest speaker tonight, Robyn Annear, who's going to talk to us about orange peel, amongst other things. And I'll leave you guessing on all of that. But firstly, I'll just say on behalf of everybody here that our library here is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Just a word about our facilities. The bathrooms, if you need them, are essentially on the other side of that wall. So go back out through the door, do a U-turn, and it'll be on your left. And emergency exits, we have two. One is through this door and to the end of the passageway, and the other one is through the door that you came in through and out that way. And if there's any emergency, which I'm sure there won't be, our staff will certainly make sure that they direct you out of the building. This year, we're celebrating a momentous occasion. It's our 170th birthday anniversary. We were established in 1854, and we're the second oldest library in Victoria. We've got a collection of over 40,000 items and take great pride in the fact that we're the sole library in Australia with such an extensive collection that's available for loan, so you can take them home and read them. And our focus is very much on local history, housing a wealth of information encompassing most towns across Victoria. Ellen here is going to be taking photographs and a video of the evening's event, and we have that on our YouTube channel if anyone wants to catch up with it afterwards, or tell your friends you really should have been here, but you can see it on YouTube. If you'd rather not be included in any way in that photography, make sure you let us know and we'll accommodate that. But it's pointing this way all the time. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end as well. So I'd like to welcome Robyn, an author who, according to the Age newspaper, tackles her sprawling subject matter with her trademark wit and her knack for singling out the perfect historical reference. So Robyn's the author of a number of books and articles. She's been on TV and also ran a podcast called Nothing on TV. I'm sure we've all identified with it, particularly towards the end of the year in January. Is the podcast still going?
Well, it's still available, but I'm not making fresh episodes.
Okay. Yeah, it's worth having a look, certainly. And of course, many of you will be familiar with Bear Brass, one of Robyn's early books, which won the Victorian Premier's Literary Award in 1995. And tonight, Robyn will tell us a bit more about her latest book, which was published late last year, and it's called Corners of Melbourne, The Great Orange Peel Panic and Other Stories from the Streets. Welcome.
Thank you for that warm welcome. It is warm too. Very pleased to be in here, not out there. This is the book, Corners of Melbourne. I'll be talking sort of sidelong about stories from this book and other stories that I discovered in putting together, in drawing together some images to show on occasions like this. It's kind of thrown my imagination in new directions, and I've discovered, some new ways of looking at Melbourne just through putting these images together. So I'm really excited to share them with you, and in passing, I will tell you about orange peel and some other things from the book. But let's start with this image. Does anybody know what this is? This is, it's a corner. It's the corner of Spring Street here and Burke Street, heading down in that direction. So we're looking as if from at the bottom of the steps of Parliament House, I guess. This was in 1856, and it was in October 1856, about 5 weeks before this building was demolished. And this was called the Salle de Valentino, S-A-L-L-E. very popular with gold diggers, many of whom called it the Sally. It was known as the Sally. Them not being terrifically conversant with the French language. It was one of Melbourne's earliest sort of gold rush facilities, I think you'd say, in the late months of 1851. So when the gold rushes were still really fresh and happening, this building was put up, and it was an equestrian circus, or what do they call an equestrian circus? A hippodrome. It was a hippodrome called Noble's Circus. So you'd go here and you'd see it was mainly horseback entertainment, women hanging from the saddles by their toes and picking up handkerchiefs from around the ring with their teeth and things like this. Really happened in here. And there were acrobats of all sorts performing in here. So you can kind of get a sense of that circus building still there. It was very meant to be temporary. It was made of canvas and timber. And it really does look as if it's on its last legs here. After just a few months, it was taken over by a fellow called James Ellis, who came out here from London, and he would be the one who started the Cremorne Gardens on the banks of the Yarra there at Richmond, which were a fabulous draw card all through the 1850s. There were balloon ascents and fireworks and swing boats and you name it out there at the Cremorne, and elephants. And one of my episodes, the first episode of my podcast, is about the Cremorne Gardens elephant. There is a suggestion that elephant actually was first shown here at the Sal de Valentino, but I do not know. So it became the Sally, beginning under James Ellis as an elegant salon de musique. And he had some proper quality music happened there, and dancing of a respectable sort. But very quickly, you might imagine, as the gold rushes elaborated, and there were a lot more men than women, it became a very rowdy dance hall in intimate proximity to the brothel district of the upper end of Little Bourke Street. Immediately behind, there was a back door, I'm sure, that took you straight there. So it ended up a pretty disreputable place, the haunt of prostitutes, it was said, and bad characters. But this picture, as I said, taken in 1856, just before the building was pulled down. Oh, let's have a look what we've got here. We've got a bit of James Ellis's name here. This would have been dancing every evening. And this Victoria bit was the Victoria Promenade. That was the last iteration of the building's use. And it was a panorama, I'm not exactly sure how this worked, a panorama of the Crimean War, featuring, for instance, a figure of Florence Nightingale tending injured soldiers and all this sort of stuff. So I'm never sure how those early panoramas worked. I know there are books written about the panoramas of Melbourne and Victoria, whether, like the later cycloramas, they or you moved automatically around, or whether you had to just walk around in a circle and look at them or view them from a central point. But they were meant to be seen in the round, and that was, as I say, was the last use of this building. But the thing about this photo, it was taken then, 1856, but it didn't emerge, wasn't seen in public until 1870. So 14 years later, when the heat had gone out of the gold rushes and Melbourne had become a much more civilised sort of place. Certainly this was long gone, and the Imperial Hotel, I think, is on this corner, and was on this corner by that time. Of course, Parliament House, the old bluestone version of Parliament House, the original wings of Parliament House were staring down bleakly onto this corner by that time. They were still being finished. The building was still underway at the time this was taken. But 1870, this was published by Thomas Dwight, who had a bookshop opposite, new and second-hand, mainly second-hand books, on the other side of Bourke Street, right up the top, near Spring. And he got his hands on a copy of this photograph, maybe the only one, and he printed lots more of it. So postcards weren't a thing then, but this, if they were, this would have been a kind of postcard. You're meant to send it home to people to show them a fixture of old Melbourne or whatever, but it became this kind of lightning rod of sentiment among people who had been there and remembered Melbourne in that far-off period, only 14 years before, but when it was a completely different place. And so this was a great nostalgic, it was a nostalgic bestseller, basically, this photo. It sold for 1 shilling and sixpence, and all the newspapers reviewed it. This relic of the most remarkable phase of Melbourne life. The photo, it's an interesting memorial of a semi-historic institution, said the Argus, and it's reproduced not because the picture is a good one, they said, because as you can see, it's pretty bleary, but because it revives memories of scenes that can never be forgotten by those who witnessed them. The tremendous dancing, the wretched oil lamps, the ragged, tawdry splendour, which you can definitely get that off from the picture, and they finished, and the fun. So, and someone else wrote, years hence, this print will be prized by the topographical historians of this city, of whom I am one, and I do prize it. The State Library of Victoria has this, as far as I know, the only copy of this, in circulation now. And what you can tell, the other thing, and I write a lot about this in the book because it's one thing that was so vivid to me reading about Melbourne's corners, the bill posting. We think of visual noise, we associate that with the time we live in now, but right through the 19th century, Melbourne was a very visually noisy place because of the bill posting trade. So anywhere there was a hoarding, and those walls counted as a hoarding, they were unused walls, the bill posters men would be out with their glue buckets and their posters. So some of the things on there, what were they? Advertising ships about to sail, Bradshaw's, I don't know what you call it, sort of diary for October, which would tell you what's on in Melbourne. There were lots of things about the upcoming election, the elections for Victoria's first responsible government, the dual houses of parliament. Those elections were in process. They went over several weeks, and some of these posters were imploring you to vote for one of the men who would soon be warming the seats in Parliament House. There was the Lord Mayor's fancy dress ball, as well as the mayoral election, and lots of other things as well. So if you go to the State Library's website, you can look at this picture and do as I've done and zoom right in, and it is a bit fuzzy, so you can't see as much detail and clarity as you might like to, but you can get almost as close to it as people passing in the street would have then. So these were the very last days of at the Sally in 1856. This is 5 years later, 1861. And this is the corner of Burke and Elizabeth Streets. That is the GPO under construction. It took 6 or 7 years, I think, to build the GPO, and the hoarding that we can see around the sides here was up for 6 or 7 years, and it was the hottest property in town to try and get your posters prominently displayed on there. The one that's clearest to see is the one that says the Victorian exhibition, 1 shilling. So the Victorian exhibition of 1861 was on at this time up at the Glass Palace, the exhibition building in William Street, where the Mint now is. And it was placarded all around town. There was also the Victorian Farmers Society exhibition on as well, and that was like a bit of a precursor of the Royal Melbourne Show, and that was up on the, I think the cattle market corner, so kind of where I was going to say the dental hospital, where Peter McCallum Hospital now is, up at the corner of Flemington Road and Royal Parade, up there. That was the showgrounds for the farmers' exhibition of equipment and produce, obviously. So we can see that. There's down on this corner, we've got clothing and outfitting, and this was Samuel Benjamin's Busy Bee tailoring establishment, remember that name. And in the distance, we can see the Monster Clothing Company, which was there for a good decade or so. And it didn't mean monster as in like monstrous or scary monster, but big. Everything was big. If you had a big public meeting, it was a monster meeting. So it was monstrous in that sense. You can just about make out these things here, when you look at them more closely, they're crinolines hanging up outside around the door of James McPherson's drapers. They're just beside the GPO in Burke Street, and as you can see, all the scaffolding and the gantry of the GPO itself There is another great photo that was taken at the same time by the same photographer. He got in behind the hoarding, in behind the fence, and got to, you can see close up the great stone blocks, all numbered, all hand numbered, so that they knew how to put them together like a big Meccano set. Over in the distance on the far side, that would be the public library, and then the building next to it with all the chimneys, the Melbourne Hospital. And this here in the distance, it was Melbourne's first arcade. I'm trying to remember, was it Queen's Arcade? They were all called either Queen's, Royal or Victoria. I'm pretty sure that one was Queen's, the first Queen's Arcade. And that ran between Little Bourke Street and Lonsdale Street, sort of where the Lonsdale frontage of Myer was in later years. So again, it's a photo. This one's from the National Library, and you can look at it up close online. We can look a little closer here. There's a better view of some of the things. And where is he? There's a bloke standing on the
Far left.
okay, we'll see him now. Okay, he's there somewhere.
Top left.
Top left.
Yeah.
Very top left.
Oh, yes, I see.
Right. So this here, if you go to the GPO now, and there's the, what is it called? The covered
Colonnade.
Yeah, this is the one at the corner, that is at the corner of Elizabeth Street and Burke, and so he was standing on the top of that. He would have been one of the workmen, I guess, or someone showing him around, because he features in this behind the scenes photo as well. So yes, you can see there's lots of theatre, the Marble Bride, ships for Otago. This was 1861 when the New Zealand gold rushes were in full heat. And lots of other things. Again, you can zoom in on that if you have the leisure. Now, did we see this in the foreground here? Any ideas about what that might be?
Is it a urinal?
It is a urinal, correct. So my book goes into this in some detail, just because I got carried away, carried away just with the idea of plumbing and sanitary arrangements. Pretty fascinating and kind of disgusting. But the whole business of the water, the Yang water arriving in Melbourne, and the developments that followed from that. And this was one of them. So there was, before this, so this was 1861. In 1859, there was one of Melbourne's first public urinals was put here by the City of Melbourne, much more basic than this one. And it wasn't well received. The idea of having urinals thus placed before the eyes of the public may appear to some quite indecent, said the Argus, but went on to say, but anyone who's visited Glasgow, and not Paris, but Glasgow as the inspiration, within the last 3 or 4 years, will agree that they've been found a great boon, sufficiently so as to warrant their being placed openly in the most public and finest streets of the city. And of course, this was very much the middle of town. The post office, the GPO was the hub of the town. So a great place to put a public toilet. The need for them was well recognised, and there'd been some lobbying to build them, but it was very shameful. It was considered very shameful by a lot of people, by a lot of the newspaper letter writing class, to have such things displayed publicly in the streets. But there it was. So this one took the place of it, because some, like I said, bill posting, advertise, capitalism was nothing new. Well, maybe it was new, but it was going full thunder by this time. If you could put advertising on anything, everybody, the City Council, for one, was all for it. So this fellow, who was just back from a visit to London, he'd seen in Piccadilly these little kiosks. They were information kiosks, though, with information and advertising painted on these glass panels all around the 8 sides. And he came back fired by the idea that he could make them even more useful by doubling as a urinal. They were called illuminated indicators, illuminated because at night a gas light would shine from within, and you'd be easily able to read the advertisement. But who would get close enough if they weren't actually going in to do so? The missed opportunity from my point of view is that he didn't have the advertising facing inwards. And also, I don't know if there was a bit of a shadow show to see at night as well. But he figured, this guy, whose name I can't remember, Edgar Ray, who was also an owner of the Melbourne Punch. He was back from London. He came up with this idea. He pitched it to the council. And they were thinking about taking their urinals down anyway because there was so much displeasure about what an eyesore and what an embarrassment they were. And he said, no, I will put up, free of charge to you, he was going to put up 100 of these around the streets of Melbourne at his own cost. He was going to pay for their upkeep and cleaning, etc., for 10 years because he figured he was going to make a fortune. He didn't make a fortune. People did not want their names on a toilet, apparently. And he didn't make much money. And boys, usually, there was lots, we'll see in some of the other photos, lots of loose stones always around the streets of Melbourne. And boys were inclined to throw them at glass such as this. So he was constantly replacing them. He had to clean them. I think the City of Melbourne paid for the gas to illuminate them, but even then they cut back the gas supply, so it wasn't very bright. And anyway, they were a bit of a washout. So this opened, and there was another one at the corner of Burke and Swanston Street near the Theatre Royal, very popular. Another one at the corner of, I think, Collins and Queen Street, near the Stock Exchange, I'm not sure. There were 3 of them only, not 100. They were only there a couple of years, and the City Council, again, sort of under pressure, and they were looking a bit seedy because he was having trouble keeping up the maintenance. So they said, no, we're going to close them down. And they were petitioned by the magistrates and the police to say, these are actually doing a really good public service because our much loved laneways were the city's toilets. I mean, at interval during theatre productions, you know, the piss would just flow down the footpaths of Burke Street. It was just, and it was there, and this whole city smelled of it. It was well known. Melbourne was known as Smellborn later, but really at this time, and if you look, I can't actually see in this one so much. In the other picture, there's actually a drain that goes here, goes across the street into the open channel. So there was no underground plumbing, so it didn't really fix that situation. But anyway, the police did a survey or did a head count. I think it was a head count in 1862 or 3 when it was being proposed to close these down. They did a head count of the number of men who used the one near the Theatre Royal one Saturday night between 6 or 7 and midnight, and the 1,897 men used that little in and out urinal. So they were much needed, but nonetheless, the City Council just a month or so later took them away and was very tardy about building more. And when they did, they were further away in the back streets. But yeah, it was, it wasn't just about sanitation. It was about the city's reputation as, a pretty smelly place and just unsavoury. Of course, the question presents itself: what did women do when they needed a wee? And we don't know. I mean, I had my theories. We saw the crinolines earlier. We all know crinolines, a big lantern-shaped dress. I think, and women had either crotchless underwear or none. I mean, you could just stand there, chatting, and then walk on, and the job was done, really. No one would know. I mean, you might splash your shoes, that would be all. So, that's just a theory. So anybody who wants to find out more is welcome to do so. So the illuminated indicator. They had advertising on there for a draper, a coal depot, a butcher, and a nurseryman that I can see there easily. This is the same corner. I'm a bit fascinated with this corner because this was Melbourne's postcard corner, certainly in years to come when Parliament House was finished and had its wedding cake front on, which it didn't here. You can just see this bleak sort of shape in the distance. This was the most popular view of Melbourne, so I'm interested in the views that it captures. Now we can see from the clock it's 20 minutes past 6, and we can see from the emptiness of the streets and the fact that if you look closely, you can see that the shutters on the shop fronts are still up. They haven't been removed for the day, so it's 20 past 6 in the morning. And I know this was 1874, and it was very early in January that this photo was taken. So the post office is finished. The clock is in place. There's a whole series of photos that show it finished, but the clock not in place. Over here we've got the beehive. So the beehive was run by the other Benjamin brother, Lawrence Benjamin, brother of Samuel, who had the Busy Bee on the diagonal corner, and this was the Beehive Clothing Company. We can see the beehive up here at the corner. This was the second iteration of this building. He originally had a pretty rough and tumble one, again with a painted beehive at the top, but this was the fancier one. So he was actually the more successful of the two Benjamin brothers. What else can we see in that picture? Parliament House, as I say, in the distance, it was just bluestone then. This is a feature of it. So down here at this corner, not far from where the Royal Arcade is now, we've got a coffee cart there. Now, you very rarely see these captured because these were creatures of the night. They had to be off the streets. I go into this in some detail in here. Had to be off the streets or closed and off the streets by 8 a.m. They were usually open from before midnight till about 8 in the morning. So this caught the coffee cart open. You can see the lovely white china cups and saucers on the top. There's a basket that would have had, you used to be able to get a roll and a saveloy and a cup of coffee for 4p, I think. But they sold all sorts of other nocturnal treats as well. So you can see the milk, what do we call those milk things? Churns, whatever. And all sorts of other stuff there. You can see the gutters up close there and the kind of stuff that got caught in them. And we can see some barber poles. In fact, let's just go back for a second. Did you see the barber's pole here? Barber's poles, you will see them in almost any shot of Melbourne. So there's two up further along among the veranda posts. And there's the Beehive Clothing Company there. So it was lovely to capture. This particular coffee cart was run by a fellow called Michael Gately, and he wasn't the better known Michael Gately, who was Melbourne's reviled hangman and had a face, as they said, with the, what they used to say about, anyway, he looked like a criminal, and he was. They recruited him, from Melbourne jail. But it wasn't that Michael Gately. This was a different one. So these street stalls that could prop in one place, a very limited number of licences were issued for these at the Mayor's pleasure. And they were originally issued to people who were infirm or disabled so they had an opportunity to earn a living and stay out of the workhouse or the benevolent asylum or the immigrant home. And anybody else, any other street traders, had to keep moving or else they could be charged with obstructing the footpath or obstructing the public ways. So anybody but these special licensed people had to keep moving. But in a pretty short time, particularly the coffee licenses, were changing hands for hundreds of pounds. So not this one, but the one up at Russell Street. The Russell Street coffee cart was the most popular. It was the closest to the theatre, the hub of the theatres. And it was a very swish affair. It was very elaborate with, hot and cold running whatevers. And it was worth hundreds and hundreds of pounds at a time when that was a lot of money. So very shortly after this, the police complained that the coffee stalls were nuclei of larrikinism and would force them to close at midnight instead of 8 a.m. And there was an outcry among the street traders at this because they did their best business after midnight, of course. So there was some compromise reached, but their hours were severely restricted. So that was Michael Gately's coffee stall. What else can we see? Oh no, this is a different one. So this is from the same batch of photos taken in early January 1874. It was a photography mob from Sydney who'd been sent down to capture these photos, these images of Australia's best city, because their employer, this chap called, I'll tell you later, I've got his name here somewhere else, was planning to send an exposition to Europe to try and attract European, not necessarily British, but he was a German himself, European immigrants to come to Australia. He was going to beckon them with an array of fantastic photos. He was an amateur photographer himself, and he lashed out on the best photographic equipment. So the plates that these images are from were as big as you could get in those times, and the plates themselves still exist in the State Library of New South Wales, and if you look at these online, you can zoom into the absolute nth degree and see everything. Now, this is the corner of, this is Stephen Street, Exhibition Street, as it came to be known, and this is Burke Street. So over here, just out of frame, was the Eastern Market. We can't see the Eastern Market. We're looking at this building here, I can't remember which bank it is. That bank is still there. You'll still see that standing. So this is looking in what direction? North along Stephen Street. What can we see here? We've got Long's Chemist Shop over on this corner. DR Long, which was good. It looked like it was Dr. Long, which he wasn't. He almost got himself DR Long. This is a horse trough here at this hotel. And horse troughs were another public facility that came into being following the turning on of the Yan Yean supply, which was on New Year's Eve, 1857, and all sorts of public fountains, drinking fountains, urinals, horse troughs, and what have you, began to literally flow once the Yan Yean was turned on. What else can we see in that picture? At this, you can't quite see them. This little blur here is a pair of toddlers overdressed for a summer day. Again, you can see them closer up, but kids never stayed still in these photos, so they are blurry even when you zoom in on them. And photographers actually, not these photographers, but portrait photographers used to charge extra for portraits of children on account of how much trouble it took to keep them still. You know, they used to have those head holders, but it didn't work so well on kids. And on the side of that bank, or just to the side of it, there's a sign, and it says, "Hail cabs here. Hail cabs here for Simpsons Road," which was the original name for Victoria Street, dividing Collingwood and Richmond, and so that was the Simpson Road cab rank there. That was the London Chartered Bank we're seeing there. Now, let me tell you about Long's Chemist Shop. It was at Long's Chemist Shop that a fellow called Philip Barry bought some arsenic, which he then swallowed in the first floor bedroom of a hotel just on the corner of Little Burke Street there. And died as a result in 18, I forget what, but his story is what I begin the book with, because his story pertains to the orange peel. He was an undergraduate at Trinity College, like Redmond Barry, no relation, Trinity College, Dublin, and he made his way in the colonies as a journalist and something of a poet. He was married, he had 2 daughters, and he was by nature of a very sociable disposition and a favourite among his brother pressmen. Yet by the time he died, aged 39, in the upstairs bedroom of that hotel, he was out of work, estranged from his family and friends, and hopelessly addicted to gin. So he took this arsenic and left a letter blaming his wife for his death, of course. But one of his obituarists traced Barry's decline to an incident 10 years earlier, before he was married. He met with an accident in the street by slipping on the pavement in consequence of treading on an orange peel. His broken leg required months in traction and left him with a slight permanent deformity. His fall in 1860, so that was in 1860, his fall placed him among the earliest local victims of the orange peel nuisance. So every late winter, spring, there'd be a big surge of oranges imported from the South Seas to Melbourne. And this was from about that time, the late 1850s, 1860, through until the 70s, this phenomenon was noted. And every season, the newspapers, in particular the Herald, which was the sort of sensation rag, would run stories it would run a tally really of the injuries caused through people slipping on orange peel. So it was a bad combination. You had the orange peel, which was slippery stuff under any conditions, but the footpaths had lately been paved with slate and stone, which was slippery. If it was raining, calamitous. And so people would buy these oranges from street traders who'd sell, not standing in a corner, but on the move. And as people walked along, they would simply strew the peel as they went. Now, I mean, it was a great snack. It was food and drink in one. It was nutritious, but not healthy if you happened to slip on some of the peel. Now, the idea was, there were no bins, but the idea was you were meant to put the peel in the proper receptacle, which was the gutter. You were meant to piff it in there. And people did not. And women in particular were held responsible, of course. But I think that was a furphy because, I think women stood to be more likely to slip on the peel because they couldn't see their feet for a start under those big dresses. And they didn't want to come across. So I don't think women were the main culprits, but nonetheless, they were blamed. There was poetry written about it. I particularly liked, so there are many episodes I go through here. So the City Council passed an ordinance that said that anybody found strewing orange peel or any fruit peel on the streets of Melbourne could be liable to a fine of £100. Now, I mean, this was unheard of. Nothing, you couldn't get fined £100 for, killing someone. But nobody ever did get fined that much. They get fined just a few shillings. But that was the big stick. That was how seriously they took it. And when the City Council met to discuss this bylaw, they all had their horror story to tell, whether it was themselves, a relative, a friend who had, broken a limb or cracked their skull, or in one instance even died as a result of slipping on orange peel. The stories were legion. So, like I say, somewhere in here I actually quote a bit of poetry that someone wrote from the point of view of a piece of orange peel in the gutter. That was pretty avant-garde. But anyway, I won't go there. So that was the orange peel bit. Now, what I wanted to show you in this picture, apart from that, this was one of the original urinals. It was still in place. This is 1874. This was put in 1859. This was the one at the corner. This was one at the corner of Lonsdale and Stephen Street. And that was a very rowdy district of town. On a nearby corner, there was what was called Rose Circus, which was held to be, the dregs of Melbourne entertainment at that time. Very close to those Little Burke Street. This was pre-Little Long. Little Burke Street was what you had to watch out for. So it was a very rackety neighbourhood and much in need of a urinal. And there it was. It's simple, but I kind of like it. I like that lamp on top. So it's still in place there, 1874. And that was, you can see in the far distance, that's how much you can zoom in on those things and get this was it here. So there's a lot to be seen in those photos. Lots of men, not so many women. This is one of the things you very rarely catch women out on the streets in these photos.
Toilets.
And no toilets. Well, okay, so here we have this. We're standing in Queen Street here. We can see lots of stones right for the throwing, lots of horse manure on the street. Looking down Little Burke Street towards Harman House is sort of over here in the distance. And we've got two hotels at the corner there, one set in from the corner. Over here we've got the fairly new tower of the Independent Church up on Burke and Russell Street, Collins and Russell Streets. And this here, again, it rewards some zooming in, but that is actually the fire tower, which was behind the town hall in Little Collins Street, and would soon be moved because buildings like that tower were going which were much taller than it. And the idea was it was meant to have overview of everything in the city. The town hall tower and clock we can see there on the left-hand side as well. What else can we see here? Let's have a look. This is the wall of the new Excelsior Hotel. Can you see what I can see? Waist-high stains along the line. And the sign, commit no nuisance. Commit no nuisance was bureaucracies for do not piss here. But people ignored it. And look at this little dog. And look down here. I mean, you know what dogs are like. So, I mean, those were more or less permanent stains on that. Well, I don't know what the other sign, the other sign says City of Melbourne caution, but I don't know, I can't get close enough to tell what they are cautioning there. But, yeah, you can see it even in that photo, how well used that was. And it wasn't even a sort of a modest laneway, it was an exposed wall, but there you go. Let's move on. We are now in, I don't know where we are, Collins Street, looking east from Queen Street. That doesn't look right. No, it's not. Collins Street, looking west from Swanston Street. That's what, here we are. We're in Swanston Street here, Town Hall behind us, looking west along Collins Street. What I want to show you here is we've got a drinking tap. This was 1860. And this would have been pretty new. These drinking taps were put here on 25 street corners attached to lampposts in 1859, again following the Yang Yang. And it was just a simple little tap, which you actually had to stand in the gutter to operate, and it was supposed to shoes. And this was the ladle, which was attached by a chain from which you would drink, and so would everybody else. That's your little surrey with a fringe on top.
Yeah.
It doesn't just appear in musicals. It wasn't a surrey because surreys had 4 wheels and it's only got 2. But again, looking close up at a lot of these photos online, you will be rewarded by glimpses of these drinking taps. Once I started looking for them, I found them everywhere. Now we're in Collins Street looking east from Queen Street. Down here somewhere, it's not quite there yet, the veranda of the Stock Exchange, which was known as under the veranda, which was where you would meet to get the latest gossip, not just on the finance markets, but on everything. Far end of Collins Street, you can see the Treasury, now the old Treasury. And what else can we see in this photo? Right, so here, if we look closer, that is the Victoria Fountain, short-lived. So this photo from 1860 just caught this before it disappeared. Another installation following the Yang Yang. The City Council decided to put in the first public fountain, and they put it in all right in the middle of the intersection of Collins and Swanston Streets, next to the Town Hall, adjacent to the Town Hall. And it was just lampooned and mocked and ridiculed as an illustration of the Municipal Council's poor taste. It was called the Victorian Fountain, as I say, christened as everything in the name of the Queen. It was only there from 1859 to 1861. They had a public competition for its design, and a chap called Joseph Sullivan, who was also a publican and a modeller of things in plaster. He won the prize and won the tender to put it up. Now, by the time I can see it here, I can just make out it's got a fence around it. Originally, it didn't, so it had it was called it was informally known as the Dolphin Fountain because the gushers came out of the mouths of dolphins. They just looked like these little fat fish. But there were dolphins spitting water into a circular trough. And of course, the passing horses would make a beeline for it and or a bolt for it, and cause no end of congestion there in that busy corner. So they put up a fence, but very soon, again, just like with the original urinals, the council felt the heat of the ridicule aimed at them, and they removed it. They said for the reasons of unblocking this important intersection. But there were people who were quite fond of it, and some of the citizens, the better off citizens of Carlton and Fitzroy, paid to have it moved to the then not very attractive Carlton Gardens. Of course, there was no exhibition building there then, but they were just a kind of dirt paddock. I think there was a place there where goats were taken to be slaughtered. There was a lot of rubbish there and a lot of misbehaviour there because it was, it wasn't well tended. So it was reinstalled there. This shows the process of its reconstruction. And Joseph Sullivan had run with the ball on this, and he'd done a lot of redesign and improvements to his design. So it had these long stalactites tinted green in his patent concrete. It wasn't called concrete, he had another name for it, but they were green, sort of snot-coloured green, and became more so. Well, and the water supply here was quixotic. It didn't. It just sort of dribbled, so it never worked very well. And he built a grotto, sort of grottos all around it. You go underneath it, there were these sort of caverns. And for the children who used to be taken to these gardens as they were better developed, the children would remember a generation later, and after it disappeared, the intrigue and their fascination with this, because their nurses and mothers used to tell them that the old man lived under there. The old man was like the bogeyman, so they would be he would be used as the big stick for them. We'll take you and leave you there with the old man if you misbehave. But you can kind of make out some dolphins frolicking there, but there is not much water coming out. He installed some glass flagons all around it, which again the boys of Carlton Fitzroy rapidly broke. It was considered an eyesore and an embarrassment by cultured folk. But as I say, the picnickers and kids who eventually would love to go to the Carlton Gardens, up until this was disappeared in order to build the exhibition building there in 1879-80. In the years between 1861 and 1880 or so, this was a much loved part of Carlton Gardens as it took shape. The Dolphin Fountain, it was called. Let's have a look. Birkenwell's monument, missing in action at present. But this was in its original site, again, in the middle of an intersection in Collins Street at the corner of Burke Street. And if we look closely at it, someone's put a poster on it. In fact, the government has put a poster on it. It's a special notice about water restrictions, and it says something about the Yang Yang. A supply of water for domestic purposes being a paramount importance to citizens, blah, 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 blah. Board of Works has decided to prohibit the use of the Yang Yang water for irrigation and garden purposes except by hand water can until further notice. On the Birkenwells monument, and again got notice from the newspapers as one of them hailed the desecration as a master stroke of art. They felt
Where did you say it was?
Huh?
Where did you say it was located?
Corner of Collins and Russell. Collins and Russell Streets, just near Scott's Church, I guess. Yeah. So we're looking eastward on Collins Street there. So it was a very prominent position, and they actually tried it. They kind of wheeled it around town. They tried it out in various positions before they settled on this being the best, and it was there for some years before it was relocated to near Parliament House, and then subsequently other places. That's that one. Here we are in Flinders Street, looking west, and this is the Custom House being rebuilt in 1874, again, brand new year, and I think this was the third version of the Custom House. It was really just being added to, it wasn't being completely rebuilt, but it was built of very poor stone to begin with. It was kind of flaking and falling apart even as they were building it around the late 1850s originally. And you can see it's surrounded by a beautiful hoarding there, with all sorts of Christmas time and New Year activities, Christmas books, Christmas pantomime, Jenny Klaus, who was a pianist, singer sewing machines, you name it, it was advertised there. And you can see some blokes at the top of they were adding to this wing, so they were augmenting that wing of the building to match the other side. I thought originally they were demolishing it, but in fact on closer look you can see they're actually builders, not demolishers. We're looking at Russell Street here, and this is into the 1880s. You can see the central parking. That's where you used to park in the days before there were trams. There was a tram in Russell Street too for some years, but not at this stage. So yes, you didn't park on the edges until the centre of the road was required for trams. I've got this picture because we've got over here the Skittle Saloon behind the hotel on the corner. And again, now the 1880s were the absolute heyday of bill posting. The International Exhibition of 1880, for which the exhibition buildings were built, just heralded a whole new era. I mean, we know it was the birth of marvellous Melbourne, and it was very much reflected in the size, in the scale, and the quantity of advertising material that absolutely plastered the city of Melbourne. You know, the printing advances in printing had meant the sheets of paper could get bigger, but also the government, the railways were taking off, and the government was issuing tenders for advertisers to advertise all over the railway stations, all along the railway lines. At any property that came up for sale or for lease along the railway lines, a huge advertising hoarding would be built at their front fence if you could see it from the railway line, especially around Richmond, which of course was a big junction station. So railway, any properties adjacent to the railway line were just plastered in 25-foot high fences and running the whole length of the property covered with advertising. Occasionally in storms they would blow down. A woman was crushed in Flinders Street by one once. But this was the skittle saloon. This was actually just part of the building. You can see they were advertising lager beer. The hoarding out the front of the St Paul's Cathedral, which was there for 10 years or more, a vast and high hoarding on two sides of a very prominent intersection, the Welcome to Melbourne, was plastered like this the whole time. Again, the church made a lot of, I think that's why they were so slow to build the cathedral, because the Anglican Church made a lot of money by contracting out the advertising rights on those hoardings. Hundreds, in fact it was more than hundreds, it was thousands of pounds a year to have the advertising rights on there. So this was, I like this Skittle Saloon, very 1880s. And I like this guy too, this dude crossing the street, his flared trousers and his Cuban heels. We see a lot of that when you zoom in on Melbourne streets at this period. There's some lamppost lounges here. This is the corner of Burke Street and looking down Swanston Street towards the Town Hall. In the, I think it's the 1880s, yes, there's tram tracks here. So, and we can see there's a pointsman, a policeman at the corner and someone standing here now actually directing traffic, which, you know, hadn't happened before. So it was well overdue. Going to the book at some length about furious driving and especially the bad driving practices at corners and going around corners. Standing at the corner like these people, you took your life in your hands, but we did have some police presence here now. The corner at the Royal Mail Hotel over here, where these people are, this was known as Poverty Point. Sydney had a Poverty Point as well. And the main actors, out of work actors or theatre folk generally would congregate there around lunchtime in particular. And because the impresarios and the theatre owners used to traditionally go to lunch at a hotel, I think this might have been it here, around the corner. And so they would kind of parade there or hang around. And it was said, you know, you could cast an entire musical from just the folks who were congregated at Poverty Point any lunchtime. Again, they weren't supposed to hang around there, certainly weren't meant to block the footpaths, and from time to time the police would have a crackdown on them and tell them all to move on. That's those chaps in close up again. Look at the shoes, look at just a little bit of a flare, a little bit of snug flare at the bottom there, quite tight fitting jacket. And, you know, everybody had their own hat style. It's interesting, you'd see a group of men and no two would have the same hat or wear the hat in the same fashion. Some had it back, some had it forward. Interesting. Here's another corner, so we've got the Town Hall behind us here at the Town Hall corner. Again, we've got a tram, so it's the 1880s, maybe even around 1890, some lads lounging there. And here, this here is Nicholson Chambers. This building had just been built and it had just replaced Jermaine Nicholson's grocery store, which was a pioneer building of Melbourne. And again, it had been there so long. Of course, the block had virtually grown up around it, and it was seen as a disgrace, you know, across the road from the town hall. And it was just a single-storey, verandahed, very run-down old grocer's shop by the time they pulled it down. And people felt very warmly towards it, but there was general agreement that it was time that it came down because Melbourne had, you know, moved on. Melbourne had outgrown that. So they kept the name when they put in this 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess, story, Nicholson Chambers at the corner there. That, of course, is the site now of the Manchester Uni building. That's the building that was pulled down in 1832 to build Manchester Uni. It was a popular meeting place, this corner here. It would be in future years known as Stuart Dawson's Corner because Stuart Dawson, I think they were the jewellers, were there for decades, and it was before there were the clocks at Flinders Street Station. You had the town hall clock there, and you know you could arrange to meet there. You could watch the clock and tell your boyfriend how late he was when he got there. But it was also known at this period, from the 1880s through till the 1910s, it was known as Puppy Dog Corner because young men of the sort of office clerk type with downy faces and flared trousers would congregate there after work of an afternoon to sort of intercept or ogle the girls who were doing the block. They'd come all the way up there and round. And they would block the footpath, and again there'd be a police swoop from time to time on Puppy Dog Corner to get those boys to move on. Also in that building, I detail in the book about the time a woman who was a photographer with an Italian, or was he Spanish-Italian, opera singer husband, considered the handsomest man in Melbourne, Madam and Signor D'Alba. They had a photography studio on the top floor of Nicholson Chambers. Photographers would often have the top floor because they had skylights to light their portrait studio. And they were going up in the lift one Saturday afternoon. The lift got stuck between floors, and there was a lift attendant, but couldn't get the lift to move. So they had a ladder apparently in the lift. Signor D'Alba put the ladder out and up and climbed up to the next floor, and he said to his wife, "Come on dear, follow me," and she did, and the lift moved and her head got stuck. So she didn't die, but she never looked the same again. And I detailed the court case and the shenanigans that went on. She saw one of Melbourne's first plastic surgeons. His reputation was brought into question in court. Her husband ended up suing the building for the loss of his wife's services, which is the thing he did. And their marriage cooled, I gather, after, and she was never seen again without a veil, despite the work of the plastic surgeon on her behalf. Oh, this was then. There she was before. I don't have an after. There she was, a fine looking woman. This was her husband, who she met when she was making a portrait of his operatic company. I'm not sure about the handsomest man in Melbourne, I have to say. I just wanted to have a close-up look at the post that these lads are leaning on, because we can see two signs on it. One says walk over crossing. That wasn't addressed to pedestrians, it was to horse handlers, and it was a long-standing sign, and it was there before there were police patrolling the corners. It was saying slow down when you're passing through an intersection, because they tended not to, and many calamities occurred as a result. Trying to cross the road, for instance, was on foot was very difficult because people didn't walk their horses over the crossing. And the other one says pedestrians keep to the right. So the road traffic kept to the left, but as a pedestrian you were instructed to keep to the right, which was curious. Now apparently this is how it was done throughout the British Empire, that for some reason the tradition was pedestrians kept to the right. This is in the underpass at Flinders Street Station at Elizabeth Street. We know the do not spit, but less known are the bits that say keep to the right. There are quite a few of those. So at the time that Flinders Street Station went up, what was that, 1900 something, it was still keep to the right.
And here we are, 1920s. We've got the GPO steps here on Elizabeth Street, looking down Elizabeth Street to the south. And we've got a fruit stall here, I think. But what have we got? We've got a sign keep to the left, and we've got a line painted down the middle of the footpath. And people are keeping to the left, and if they didn't keep to the left, they could be fined. And then there was, needless to say, I mean, as always, there was an outcry when they changed the rules, but it changed in England first, it changed in Sydney next, in 1925 it changed in Melbourne, and people thought this was crazy stuff. But they got used to it. Of course, we don't do that now, we just walk anywhere. And that, I think, that's the end. I'm going to leave it on there. That just gives you a taste of some of the stuff, not just the street corners, obviously, but streets. And as I say, putting these images together took me into a whole new realm. The book itself came together in a very short time, which I talk about in the introduction to the book. And it's not a boast, but it's just more a, hey, can you believe this? It took me, what did it take? Hang on, I have to tell you. It took me 39 weeks, that's right. It took me 39 weeks from deciding I was going to write a book about the corners of Melbourne, putting a search into Trove that said corner of and street, at the corner of and street, and choosing Melbourne papers and putting them in chronological order and between 1850 and 1900 and just finding what came up. And I found much more than I could use for a single book, but it is just incredible what you can do, how much you can find, and how you can thread them together to find the themes and the stories and the sort of continuity and create a narrative. I mean, when I first wrote Bear Brass, I was still winding microfilms and going half blind in the process, and it's just, you know, it was just like a great game to do this. And I learned, the amazing thing was I learned so much. I've talked a lot about water and the boon that the water supply was to Melbourne in the 1850s and 60s. I had never seen that side of the city before, that kind of and because it was all because I was looking at corners, and so much of the water supply story was delivered at corners, whether it was fire plugs or the fountains that they had going on the day that the Yang Yang first was turned on. It all happened at the corners. So it's just another way you can get under the skin of a place, is by putting in some restricted kind of search terms and just seeing what it delivers up. And it was just another portal into a place that I thought I knew really well, and I discovered, you know, lots that I had never thought about. So it was a great game putting it together, and just, I was, you know, by the time it came out, I was just so excited at what I'd discovered, and the new layers of the city, and also just the possibilities that I felt were there for, you know, discovering even more in the same way, and the new challenges that I or somebody else could set ourselves to find out more about the city by using these new tools. So it's not all Trove, but it's a very Trove-driven book.
Some questions?
Are the pictures you put up tonight in the book?
No, there you go. No, it's not a picture book. I mean, there's a few cartoons, but no, they are not in the book. I'm kind of working on something that I hope will turn into a book, which will have the images and their zooms. It's not as easy as it sounds though, because while you can zoom in easily and show it on a screen, it doesn't translate so well to reproduction on paper, and it's just creating a bit of a challenge. AI is a new tool you can use in that, because where a photo, the definition isn't good enough, AI will put in new pixels to extrapolate on what is there. You know, you could have mixed feelings about that, but it can, you know, it can bring things to life. You don't want to do it though, I've discovered, where there's any kind of print. So if you've got bill posting or signage, it just turns it into gibberish because it doesn't recognise it as writing, and it extrapolates entirely the wrong direction. So I do have something, I hope, in the works there, but it's just a bit of a puzzle at the moment. Another question?
Oh, well, I'll ask mine about the fountain that was moved to Carlton Gardens and then disappeared. I was wondering, it was the thought that it was going to be a drinking fountain?
Yeah, yes.
Because of the, in the centre.
It was, so there was this whole movement worldwide at that time towards fountains as a sign of process, a sign of progress and public amenity, and of civilization and the march thereof. And the idea was that that particular fountain was going to be a drinking fountain for animals and for humans. So there were some drinking taps somehow part of it, but it ended up having a fence around it, and it was purely ornamental and not very ornamental at that. So it didn't kind of, the brief didn't work too well. And by the time soon after that fountain was put there, the first of the lamppost drinking fountains or drinking taps were brought into action. In fact, the first one was at that town hall corner, and they were soon rolled out across the city. So, but the idea was that it was going to be an all-purpose fountain initially. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they're better on the sort of edges because you don't want everyone rushing into the centre.
Yeah, exactly. It seemed a crazy idea to be rushing into the middle of an intersection to be having a drink, but yeah, I'm sure people took a dip in it, that first summer, for sure.
Because certainly in boulevards and other places, like they're drinking, but they're also a kind of a cool down.
Yes, and that was the thing. I mean, and sensibly too, it was, well, if these things are taken off in Europe, naturally in our hot climate, it can only do people good. And the idea of drinking fountains, of course, was so people could drink the water, because we didn't have water bottles. And your alternative was either to have lemonade from a street cellar, or to go into a hotel to have a soft drink, and there the temptation was to have something harder for the same price.
So presumably the plumbing was down the centre of the roads.
Yep, I'm not sure. Yeah, it looked like it was from the idea of the fountains and but I don't know. It certainly seemed to be attached to the lampposts, but the first urinals that the City of Melbourne installed, no, they had drinking fountains on the outside, which was actually judged to be the worst aspect of, the kind of the connection between a public toilet and a drinking fountain.
So
was
my
just
second
beyond the
question,
pale.
if I may, was how much did Mr. Sullivan hope to get for every chap who was going in spending his penny? Was it a penny? Did you had to pay?
No, it was free. So he was making his money. He hoped from the advertising. Yeah, advertising was everything, and there was big money in advertising. He just misjudged the medium, though.
Thank you. I've got to ask you about rabbit holes, and you've obviously been down lots of them. How do you, with all of that, how do you contain all those rabbit holes? First, would stop yourself going off. But also then to bring them together so concisely
it's
in
tricky.
a series of stories.
So it's got that much harder. The rabbit holes are, there are many more rabbit holes than there were in the days when you were doing that. But the very precise search helps, because what happens when you do a search like that is it doesn't only illuminate the articles that have your search terms in them, so it restricts what you can see around it. Your eyes aren't darting off in every direction quite as much as they might otherwise. But I have a whole file, as I'm sure you will do, a whole file of things to follow up later.
So many buildings and fountains and urinals and so many stories behind those.
And just characters. So there are lots of characters in here. Because we've been looking at pictures, you haven't heard as much about the characters as you would if you read the book. But yes, the people who come out, who are often on the periphery of things, I have many notes saying find out more about them later. Yeah.
I'm sure they're very interested in this book and will be interested in the next one as well.
Thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering, in terms of the urinals and that, was there much support for them from, say, the publicans and the cafe owners whose laneways might be a bit smelly if these urinals were there?
I don't get that impression. I mean, they did, most of those, a hotel or certainly a theatre would have some kind of outhouse, but it was very limited facilities and, you know, pretty grotty. So yes, they were just expecting that the laneways, I think it's just how it was. I think it was just the expectation that people would go out to your adjacent laneway and you know, do their business and possibly get robbed while they were there, because a lot of that happened in those laneways and other things too. Yeah, but you know, there were a lot of publicans on the city council, and they were dead against urinals. They were dead against drinking fountains. Any of those things that would, you know, offer people options. Yeah, take business away. Yeah. Someone else had their hand up.
Thank you very much. That gentleman that came down or commissioned photographers from Sydney to come down.
Yes.
Was that Holterman?
It was Holterman, thank you. Yes, it was. So he made his money at Hill End, or one of those gold fields.
Holterman Nugget, I think.
Yeah.
It's
So there's a big
picture.
That's right. There's a photo of him with it, and he hired a fellow called Merlin, who had the photography business at Hill End, and there's a great book of the Hill End photographs, because Merlin had this habit of going to a gold rush town and he would advertise, I'm going to photograph every building in the town. If you want a picture of your building, you can buy it from me. Most of those images were lost, but because Holterman took him under his wing and said, I want you to be my photographer, I like what you do, Holterman took those photos and kept them, and they eventually found their way to the State Library of New South Wales. But Holterman, yes, commissioned in the first place Merlin, his name was Beaufoy Merlin, B-E-A-U-F-O-Y, Beaufoy Merlin, to be his man on the ground, who went out and photographed New South Wales, country towns, Sydney, Melbourne, and Melbourne's big cities and towns. But Merlin died suddenly, not long after this project began, and so his assistant had been a chap called Charles Bayliss, who'd been a boy who had tagged along with him when Beaufoy was photographing in Melbourne years before, and Bayliss had become a very skilled photographer in his own right, so he became Holterman's man. And when you see some of the photos that were taken in 1874, they actually feature the van or the wagon, and it has Holterman's exposition and some other promotional puff, and it says Charles Bayliss, photographer. And in the photos, many of them, Charles Bayliss's own assistant is seen. And it's quite curious, because these are meant to be photos that are showcasing our marvellous city. And here's this guy, and he's such a young spiv. He looks a lot like the guy with the flares and the cute heels boots. And he's front and centre in these most cocky poses. You just feel you really get to know this boy. I don't know who he was, can't find any trace of who that lad was or what he went on to. But they had access, as I said, to just the best photographic equipment, and this well-outfitted van somehow that got these plates, and there must have been hundreds of them, back to Sydney in one piece. And in 1952 or something, a photographic historian went to Holterman's mansion on the North Shore, which had been locked up for years, you know, one of these stories, unlocked the room and went in, and here were all these cases with the beautifully preserved glass plate negatives, thousands of them in there. So it's just one of those Aladdin's Cave stories. And yeah, just brilliant, the best photographs of Melbourne in this kind of unusual period, you know, before it was marvellous Melbourne. So they caught a lot of the back streets and the back street buildings, which would be pulled down to make way for marvellous Melbourne. So they kind of capture the first phase of Melbourne, you know, the end of the first phase of Melbourne Gold Rush building. So they're just the best photos. So if you go to the State Library of New South Wales, and
Mitchell Library, is it?
Mitchell, yeah, they're there in the Mitchell Library, but go to the State Library of New South Wales catalogue and put in Holterman collection or something like that, you'll be out in Melbourne, you'll be able to browse these images. They're just the best, yeah.
Robyn, your talk to us has been extremely engaging, entertaining and informative. I'll finish this part of the evening now. Are you available to stay a bit longer?
I can stay a bit longer. I do have to go train back to Castlemaine, but I can stay a bit longer.
We can talk probably a bit longer. Thank you so much.
Thanks.